The doctor stepped out from behind two double doors, clipboard against his chest, and asked me if I was ready to go get tested to save my brother's life. My mother was still gripping my hands, tears running down her face. And I looked at her and I said one word. No. To understand why I said that word, you have to go back 4 years, to a Tuesday night, and a bowl of spaghetti nobody finished. My name is Naomi. I'm 31 years old. And for most of my life, I believed my parents loved my daughter and me exactly as much as they loved my brother Corey and his family. I found out how wrong I was in the space of about 6 weeks. And I've spent every day since living with what that cost. My daughter Ivy was 6 years old when the fevers started. Not the kind that break with medicine and a good night's sleep. The kind that came back every few weeks with no warning, that left her too tired to hold a crayon or finish a sentence. I took her to 4 different doctors before one finally had an answer. A rare autoimmune condition. The kind with a name most people, including most doctors, had never heard before. Somewhere around 200 documented cases in the entire country. There was one treatment that actually worked. It wasn't approved by our insurance because it was still classified as experimental, even though the data behind it was strong. It cost $68,000. And Ivy needed to start it within 10 weeks because after that point, the disease would begin causing permanent organ damage that no treatment could reverse. I remember sitting in the specialist's office holding that number in my head like it was a physical weight. I remember driving home and not being able to tell you a single detail of the drive. That night, I made spaghetti because it was Ivy's favorite and I needed something in the kitchen to feel normal. She only ate 3 bites before she got tired and had to lie down on the couch. I watched her chest rise and fall under her blanket, and I picked up my phone and I called my parents. I sat on the bathroom floor so she wouldn't hear me if I broke down. I asked for anything. I said even $5,000 would help me start a payment plan with the hospital. I wasn't asking them to solve it. I was asking them not to let their granddaughter run out of time. My father cleared his throat first, the way he always does before he says something he's already decided. He said money was tight right now, that they had their own obligations, that they simply weren't in a position to help. My mother's voice came in behind his, softer but somehow colder. She said family shouldn't put each other on the spot like this, that it wasn't fair to ask. I said okay. I said I understood. I hung up the phone, and I sat on that bathroom floor for a long time, staring at nothing, because some part of me already understood exactly what had just happened, even if I wasn't ready to admit it yet. Here's the part where most people watching think they know what's coming. They think, okay, the grandparents said no, that's hard, but maybe they really were struggling. Stay with me, because this is where it gets a lot worse. 5 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a message in the family group chat. My brother Corey and his fiancée had put an offer in on a house. Not a starter home. A 5-bedroom house with an in-ground pool already built, in a neighborhood where I couldn't have afforded the property taxes alone. I remember reading the message twice because I thought I'd misunderstood something. I called my mother and asked how they'd managed the down payment on a place like that. She answered so fast it was like she'd been waiting for someone to ask. She said she and my father had gifted it to them. A wedding present, she called it, even though the wedding itself was still a year away. She said it with pride in her voice. Actual pride, like she was announcing an achievement. The same bank account that had nothing to spare for a 6-year-old had apparently found enough for a swimming pool. I didn't scream at her. I didn't say a single accusing word. I just said congratulations, and I hung up, and I sat down at my kitchen table with a calculator, doing math I already knew the answer to, hoping somehow I'd gotten it wrong. I hadn't gotten it wrong. If you're still with me right now, I want you to sit with that number for a second the way I had to. $68,000 for a child's medical treatment. An unknown, larger number, quietly handed over as a gift for a house with a pool. Both decisions made by the same 2 people in the same 6-week window. Comment below if you've ever had to do math like that about your own family, because I promise you, you are not the only one. I didn't have that kind of money sitting anywhere. So I did what I could. I sold my car and leased a cheaper one just to free up cash. I took a second loan out against my house. I started an online fundraiser, and strangers who had never met Ivy, who didn't know her favorite color or the way she hummed when she colored, gave more in 2 weeks than my own parents had offered in her entire life. It came to $11,000. It wasn't enough, and worse, it didn't come fast enough. The treatment window closed before I could gather what she needed. Ivy passed away 9 weeks after that first phone call to my parents. She died in a hospital room with a view of a parking garage, holding a stuffed rabbit with one ear worn thin from years of being chewed on as a baby. I was holding her other hand. My parents were not there. They told me afterward they didn't want to see her like that, in that condition, hooked up to machines. They came to the funeral instead, dressed carefully, and cried real tears in front of everyone who came to pay their respects. Corey and his fiancée moved into their 5-bedroom house 11 days after we buried my daughter. He posted photos of the pool online. Sunlight on the water, a caption about new beginnings. I sat there scrolling through it at 2 a.m, unable to look away, unable to stop looking either. I kept showing up to holidays after that. Not because I'd forgiven anything, but because I didn't want to hand anyone the satisfaction of saying I'd abandoned the family. I smiled in photos. I passed the mashed potatoes. But something in me had gone quiet and cold, and it never fully thawed again. During those years, I went back to school and became a paralegal specializing in trust and estate law, which still strikes me as darkly funny given everything that had already happened. I learned, professionally, how families use documents to decide who gets remembered and who gets written out. I had already learned that lesson personally in a much more painful classroom. Corey, for his part, never once brought up the house or the money or the timing. He'd talk about his new kitchen island or the home theater he was building in the basement, like none of it had cost anything at all. Like it hadn't cost me my daughter. Then, 3 weeks ago, my phone rang at almost midnight. It was my mother, and her voice was shaking in a way I hadn't heard since the week Ivy was diagnosed. Corey had been in a serious car accident. Internal injuries, emergency surgery, and now his kidneys were failing. He needed a transplant urgently, and none of the family members already tested were a match. The transplant coordinator had specifically asked about any other close biological relatives who hadn't been tested yet. My mother said my name the way you say the name of the one person who might save everything. Naomi. You could be his match. You have to come. I drove to the hospital that night. I want to be honest about why, because it wasn't for my parents, and it wasn't even entirely for Corey. I drove because some stubborn, exhausted part of me still couldn't sit at home doing nothing while somebody was dying, whatever history sat between us. The waiting room smelled exactly like Ivy's hospital had. Same fluorescent lighting, same hum from the vending machine in the corner, same specific flavor of fear in the air that you never really forget once you've breathed it in. My mother saw me first and crossed the room fast, grabbing both my hands in hers, tears already falling before she even reached me. Please, she said. You're the only one who can save him. You have to help. I looked down at her hands wrapped around mine. The same hands that had once, calmly, over the phone, told me they couldn't spare anything for my daughter. That's when the transplant coordinator stepped out through the double doors, clipboard against his chest, glancing between the three of us with the practiced neutrality of someone who has delivered every kind of news there is. He looked directly at me and asked if I was ready to head back for compatibility testing. I picked my bag up off the floor, slung it over my shoulder, and I said the sentence I'd actually driven there to say. Quiet. Steady. Final. No, I'm not getting tested. I'm not a donor candidate. I'm here to see my brother. I'm not here to save him. My mother's face went white, the color draining out of it like I'd struck her. My father, sitting a few chairs back, stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. You don't mean that, my mother whispered. He's your brother. He's dying, Naomi. I told her, as calmly as I could manage, that I knew exactly what dying looked like. That I had sat beside it myself, alone, holding a small cold hand, while the people in this family decided a swimming pool mattered more than a treatment for their own granddaughter. I told her this was never about punishing Corey for getting sick. It was about refusing to pretend that sharing blood erases what happened 4 years ago. My father tried his other voice then, the low, reasonable one he uses when he wants to sound like the calm adult in the room instead of the person being cornered. He said things had been complicated back then, that they'd had financial obligations I didn't fully understand, that helping Corey with the house was never meant as any kind of statement against Ivy. I asked him one simple question. If it wasn't a statement, then why was I the one told there was nothing to spare, while Corey was handed enough money to buy a 5-bedroom house with a pool he waited an entire year to even use? Neither of them answered me. They never really do. My mother grabbed my wrist as I turned to walk away and asked how I could let hate win over family like this. I pulled my hand back gently but firmly and told her this had nothing to do with hate. Hate would have meant staying home tonight. I was here. I told her I would sit in that waiting room for as long as Corey needed someone from this family present. I would talk to him if he wanted to talk. But my body was the last thing left in this entire story that was still mine to decide about, and it was not up for negotiation, not even tonight. A little while later, Corey's fiancée found me out in the hallway. She looked exhausted and frightened, caught in the middle of a family story that had started long before she ever became part of it. She asked me quietly, with no accusation in her voice at all, if there was anything that could change my mind. I told her the truth. This was never really about blood type or medical odds. It was about learning, in the space of 6 weeks, exactly how replaceable my daughter had been in this family, the 1 year she needed all of us the most. Corey ended up matching through the donor registry with a distant cousin on my father's side, someone who barely knew any of this history and simply happened to be compatible. The surgery went well. He survived. I visited him once during his recovery. I sat by his bed for about 15 minutes. I told him I was glad he was alive, and I meant it. He apologized to me then, quietly, and I think for the first time, honestly. He said he'd always known the down payment on the house had landed the same month I'd asked for help, and he'd said nothing about it for years, because staying quiet was easier than facing what it meant. It didn't undo anything. But it was more honesty than my parents had ever given me, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt like one person in that family finally understood what all that silence had actually cost. I don't see my parents much anymore. Holidays happen without me at their table now, and I've stopped waiting for an apology I know isn't coming. I visit Ivy's grave every month. I bring her little yellow flowers because she used to draw yellow houses with blue windows on every card she ever made me, the kind of home she never got the chance to grow up in. I've learned that family isn't just the people who share your blood. It's the people who show up when it actually costs them something. My parents showed me exactly who they were the month they told me there was nothing to spare. It just took me a while to stop waiting for them to become someone else. If this story hit you somewhere, if it made you think about the family you were born into versus the one you actually choose to hold close, stay with me, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Stories like this one deserve to be heard, and there are so many more of them still waiting.